I'm Casey, and my friend Leela dragged me into Dollar Tree thinking it would be a quick trip for snacks. We didn't expect to get trapped in a nightmare. At first it was just quiet. Too quiet. Then the aisles started changing, the shelves twisting, and the dolls watching us. By the time we realized the store wasn't just a building, it was alive, it was already too late. I never thought a simple trip to Dollar Tree could feel so wrong. I walked through the automatic doors, expecting the usual fluorescent lights, bargain shelves, and the faint hum of shoppers talking and carts rolling. But today, something was off. The store was silent. Not the normal quiet of a slow morning, but a thick, heavy silence that pressed against my ears and made the small hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I paused at the entrance, telling myself I was imagining it, that maybe the store had just opened and the early morning shoppers hadn't arrived yet. I pushed the thought away and stepped inside. The air felt different. Usually, Dollar Tree has that mix of plastic candles and a faint smell of cleaning chemicals. Today, though, it was almost earthy, damp, like wet cardboard that had been left in a corner for weeks. The scent made me wrinkle my nose, but I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just some old shipment that hadn't been stocked properly. My cart rattled softly as I moved toward the first aisle, the sound somehow loud in the eerie silence. The shelves looked strange. The usual bright displays were there, but there were also items that didn't belong. Cracked dolls, old dusty toys, a cereal box yellowed with age, and small trinkets I had never seen in a Dollar Tree before. Everything seemed just slightly off, like the store had swallowed parts of another, older place and hidden them behind familiar shelves. I walked slowly, scanning the aisles, my eyes darting from shelf to shelf, expecting anyone to appear. But there was no one, not a single employee or customer in sight. I told myself I was overthinking things. Maybe it was the early hour. Maybe it was just a slow day. But the deeper I walked, the heavier the feeling of being watched became. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the floor. My footsteps seemed to echo louder than they should. I passed a stack of cheap picture frames, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move inside one of the frames. A flicker, a shadow. My heart skipped, and I shook my head, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. Then I saw a tear figure at the end of the aisle. I froze. It was tall and thin, standing perfectly still, and even from this distance, something about it was wrong. Its posture was unnatural, rigid, like a doll propped up by invisible strings. I squinted, trying to make out its features, but the figure seemed blurred, like my eyes couldn't focus properly. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The aisle was empty, silent again, nothing to explain what I had just seen. I felt a shiver run down my spine and turned to leave the aisle, but that's when I noticed my cart. There was an item inside it. I hadn't picked anything up yet, hadn't even touched the shelves. I stepped closer and peered down. A small doll sat in the cart. Its face was cracked, paint peeling, and the eyes were hollow, black holes that seemed to look straight through me. My stomach tightened, and my fingers curled around the handle of the cart, as if holding it could somehow protect me. I looked around again, expecting someone to walk in, expecting this to be a prank. But the aisles remained empty, the shelves silent. The doll didn't belong. I didn't know how it got there. A creeping dread filled my chest, slow and suffocating. I wanted to drop the cart and run, but a part of me felt frozen, rooted to the spot, as if staring at it would somehow help me understand what was happening. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I had knocked the doll off a shelf without noticing. But the thing about the eyes, the way they seemed alive, even in their chipped and faded state, made my skin crawl. I felt like the store was holding its breath, waiting, watching. Every instinct screamed at me to leave immediately, to run out of this strange, silent place. Yet I found myself moving forward, down the aisles, unable to turn back, drawn deeper into the store by a mix of fear and curiosity I couldn't explain. The further I walked, the more the store seemed to change. Shadows crept along the floor in shapes that didn't match the shelves. The corners of aisles were darker than they should have been, and through it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something or someone was there, waiting in the shadows, watching me, patient and silent. As I moved past the frozen toy displays, I realized I couldn't see the exit from here. The doors I had walked through seemed farther away than they should be. The store felt bigger, twisted somehow, and the doll in my cart, its empty eyes reflected the faint overhead lights in a way that made me feel like it was smiling at me. And then I heard it, the faintest whisper, almost lost in the silence, right at the edge of my ear. Not words, just a breath, cold, wet, and it made me spin around, my heart hammering, my stomach turning over. There was no one there, only the doll, staring at me, blank and cruel, as if it had been waiting for me all along. I tried to convince myself to leave. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had imagined the whisper, the doll, and the shifting shadows. But the moment I stepped forward, the store seemed to stretch and twist in ways that didn't make sense. The aisle I had just walked down didn't lead anywhere familiar. The shelves loomed taller, the lights flickering faintly above, casting long, uneven shadows that made the corners of my eyes feel alive. Each step I took made the linoleum floor creak under my feet, loud in the oppressive silence, like the sound of my heartbeat echoing through the empty space. I clutched the cart tighter, the cracked doll inside staring up at me, its eyes hollow, unblinking, unnerving. I kept thinking I heard tiny footsteps behind me, soft, scraping along the floor, but when I turned, no one was there. Only shelves filled with strange items, broken toys, faded decorations, old and dusty boxes that shouldn't have been here. The aisles had changed again. The familiar store layout I knew was gone, replaced by narrow corridors of shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly. It felt like I had walked into a maze designed to trap me, and every turn I took seemed to loop me back to the same dim corner of the store. The further I went, the stranger the items became. Cheap home goods mixed with objects that seemed decades old. I passed stacks of cracked picture frames, some containing photographs I didn't recognize, families I had never seen, children smiling, their faces oddly distorted, like the photos had been warped over time. One small frame fell off a shelf as I brushed past it. I bent down to pick it up, and my stomach dropped. The child in the photograph had no eyes, just black, gaping holes where the eyes should have been. I jerked back, my fingers trembling as I dropped the frame back onto the shelf. The air felt heavier here, thick and musty, and it carried a faint whisper I couldn't place. It wasn't words, just sounds, breaths, scratches, a faint dragging that seemed to circle me, coming from all directions at once. I clicked my tongue nervously, telling myself I was imagining it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, waiting, watching my every move. I wanted to run, but I was afraid to move too quickly. The silence when it returned was worse than the noise, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I rounded a corner and froze. In the center of the aisle was a display of cheap flashlights. Without thinking, I grabbed one, clicking it on. The beam of light cut through the shadows, illuminating the shelves just enough to make them appear longer, darker, more twisted than they should have been. And then I saw the handprints, small, childlike, pressed into the dust on the floor, smudged and smeared in random directions. They led toward a dark corner where the shadows pooled like water, thick and black. My heart began to pound as I stepped closer, my mind racing with the thought that whatever left those prints was still nearby. Something moved at the edge of my flashlight's beam, a flicker, a shadow, shifting just out of clear sight. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as though the floor itself were holding me in place. My ears picked up the faintest sound, soft scraping like nails on linoleum. I spun, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the aisle was empty. The shadows flickered again, and I realized the shelves themselves seemed different. They weren't just lined with objects. They were watching me. The dolls, the broken toys, even the boxes, they all seemed to be angled toward me, their edges turning like faces slowly following my movements. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, that I was letting fear twist reality. But then I felt it, a breath, hot and wet, on the back of my neck. I whirled around, but no one was there. Only the doll in my cart, its cracked face tilted slightly, as if studying me, waiting. My hands shook as I tried to back away, but the aisle seemed to stretch farther than it should, twisting like a living thing to keep me inside. I stumbled, catching myself on a shelf, and heard something else, a soft whisper, low and raspy, almost a hiss, a sound that didn't belong, that no one should be able to make. Panic rose in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice felt trapped, stuck somewhere behind my teeth. The cart rattled as I pushed it forward, the doll staring at me with its hollow, accusing eyes. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the store had changed again. The exit signs weren't where they should be. The doors I had come through seemed miles away, and every aisle looked the same, like a looping labyrinth of shadow and dust. And then I saw it again, the figure, standing at the far end of the aisle, thin, tall, motionless, its head tilted slightly, unnaturally, and though the distance made it impossible to see its face clearly, I felt its gaze pierce straight into me. A chill ran through my body, and a sick, unshakable feeling settled deep in my stomach. It didn't move, didn't approach, but somehow I knew it was waiting for me, watching me, and somehow I knew I wasn't supposed to leave. I ran. My footsteps echoed through the aisles, loud and hollow, as if the store itself were amplifying my fear. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, one after another, creating strobing shadows that made the shelves seem to shift and sway. Each aisle felt longer than the last, twisting like a maze that led nowhere. My cart rattled as I pushed it, the cracked doll inside staring up at me, its black, hollow eyes unwavering. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that this was just a strange coincidence, but every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Something was alive in this store, and it was aware of me. I stumbled into the home goods section, the shelves stacked high with cheap picture frames and plastic decorations. My chest tightened as I noticed the photographs in the frames weren't ordinary. Families smiled, children laughed, but their faces were scratched out. One frame at eye level made my stomach turn. The child's eyes were gouged into black holes, and somehow, the more I stared, the more those holes seemed to watch me back. My breath hitched, and I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a display of plastic plates. The silence around me pressed down, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the flickering lights. I thought I heard something moving behind me, something soft and deliberate, like small feet sliding across the floor. I spun around, flashlight raised, but the aisle was empty. Only the shelves and the strange, twisted items remained, angled as if leaning toward me. The shadows stretched unnaturally, creeping along the floor like dark fingers. I felt trapped, the walls of the store pressing in on me, folding the aisles into a labyrinth with no exit. Then I saw them. Dolls. Cracked, broken dolls, crawling or rather, slithering out of the shelves. Their movements were unnatural, jerky and almost liquid, as though they weren't really toys at all. They moved toward me slowly, deliberately, their hollow eyes fixed on mine. My hands shook, my mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. I tried to push the cart faster, but it felt heavier, as if the store itself were pulling it down. The dolls crept closer, some with cracked limbs dragging along the linoleum, others sliding smoothly like shadows. I turned a corner and found the aisle behind me gone, where I had just come from. There was now a solid wall of shelves, lined with more dolls, more broken toys, and objects I couldn't name. My panic rose. The figure I had seen before appeared at the end of the aisle again, tall and thin, perfectly still, its head tilted in a way that felt impossible. And though I couldn't see its face clearly, I felt its gaze cut straight through me. It didn't move, yet I felt like it was closing in, a presence that needed nothing more than my fear to reach me. I stumbled forward, my flashlight shaking in my hands. The beam cut across the floor, and that's when I saw the small handprints. They were childlike, smudged and pressed into the dust, leading toward a darker corner. My throat tightened. The sound of whispering started again, low and almost too faint to hear, but it surrounded me, coming from all directions. I tried to tell myself it was the dolls, or the wind, or my imagination, but it didn't sound like anything human. It sounded hungry, patient, waiting for me to make a wrong move. The store seemed alive now, twisting and folding in ways I couldn't understand. Shelves leaned closer, shadows stretched farther, and the lights above flickered faster. Every photograph I passed seemed to change, the faces more distorted than before. Smiles stretched wider, eyes blackened, and in the reflections of shiny surfaces, I thought I saw my own face change older, hollow, as though I was already becoming part of the store. I ran blindly, turning corners without direction, praying I would find the exit. The dolls followed, some slithering along the shelves, others crawling across the floor, their cracked faces staring, watching. I tripped over something small and hard, falling to my knees. My flashlight rolled across the floor, the beam landing on a reflection in the shiny tiles. My heart stopped. My reflection wasn't mine. The eyes were hollow, the lips twisted into a faint, mocking smile. My chest tightened as I realized I wasn't just being watched, I was being mimicked, replaced. I scrambled to my feet, the whispering growing louder, the shadows stretching closer, and in the corner of my vision, I saw it again, the figure. It smiled, not a normal smile, but one that made my stomach turn. There was no warmth, no humanity, only malice. And though it didn't move toward me, I knew it didn't have to. The store itself would do the rest. I hid behind a display of seasonal decorations, my heart hammering in my chest, each beat loud in the oppressive silence. The figure at the end of the aisle hadn't moved. It just stood there, perfectly still, tall and thin, head tilted unnaturally. Its presence pressed against me, heavy and suffocating, like the air itself had weight. The dolls that had been following me stopped crawling. Their cracked faces turned toward me, staring without blinking, their silence more terrifying than any sound. The store seemed to breathe around me, the faint scent of damp cardboard and decay stronger now, filling my lungs with a cold, choking thickness that made my head spin. I forced myself to move, inching along the aisle, trying to stay low and quiet. Every step felt like a mistake. The shadows along the shelves stretched and twisted, shifting with a life of their own, reaching toward me as if to grab and pull me into them. My flashlight trembled in my hands, the beam shaky, cutting weakly through the darkness. I tried to focus on the exit, but the aisles had changed again. Where I had been certain of an open path, there were now walls of shelves that hadn't existed moments before, forming a maze I didn't recognize. The dolls weren't moving, but the way they were positioned unnerved me. Each one had its head tilted just slightly, facing me, as if they were waiting for the right moment. I could feel their gaze like tiny needles pressing into my back, crawling under my skin. I pressed myself against the display, my fingers brushing against plastic pumpkins and fake autumn leaves. The decorations were cold, rough under my skin, but I didn't care. All that mattered was not being seen, not being noticed. I tried to make sense of the store, any logical explanation for what was happening. Maybe it was a prank, or a setup, or even a hallucination brought on by stress. But logic fell apart the moment I noticed the photographs again. They lined the shelves, hundreds of them, and each one had changed. The families I had passed before were now distorted. The children's faces were twisted, black holes where their eyes should be, mouths curved into faint, mocking smiles. I shivered, taking a step back, and realized that some of the faces looked familiar, faces that weren't mine, but somehow reminded me of people I knew, people I had seen recently. My stomach churned at the thought. I edged toward what I thought might be an exit, but the store had reshaped itself into another looping corridor. The walls seemed closer now, shelves pressing inward like the ribs of some enormous, living creature. The whispers started again, low and raspy, surrounding me from all directions. It wasn't words, just sounds, breaths, scratches, and something wet, sliding along the floor. I pressed my back against a shelf, trying to steady my breathing. The doll's eyes glinted in the dim light, reflecting the faint flicker of the overhead fluorescence, making it feel like hundreds of tiny faces were staring at me. I stumbled into a small bathroom, the door barely big enough to hold me. I locked it behind me, breathing hard, my hands shaking as I pressed my back against the cold metal of the door. The cracked mirror above the sink reflected me, but the reflection, it wasn't right. My own eyes stared back at me, hollow, dark, empty. My lips were twisted into a faint, cruel smile I hadn't made. I recoiled, pressing my hands to my face, but the reflection didn't change. It smiled at me, patient and mocking, as though it were waiting for something. Then I noticed the floor. Tiny dolls, crawling toward the bathroom door. Their broken faces glinted under the weak light, eyes hollow, limbs jerking unnaturally. I realized they hadn't stopped moving, they were just biding their time, patient, waiting for me to let my guard down. I could hear their soft scraping across the tiles, the whisper of movement that made my skin crawl. I backed into a corner, trying to hold the door closed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, closer, circling the bathroom, filling every crack and corner. My hands shook as I gripped the doorknob, knowing it would not hold for long. The dolls were relentless, patient, and the figure was still out there, just beyond the door, watching, waiting. I felt a cold, wet brush against my neck, not a hand, but something intangible, a presence, a brush of air that carried with it the faintest whisper of a voice, low and insistent, calling my name. And then, as I pressed myself into the corner, trying to disappear, I realized the most terrifying thing. The store wasn't just around me, it was inside me. Every reflection, every shadow, every distorted photograph was a part of me now. The walls weren't walls, they were mirrors of my fear. And the doll in my cart, still staring with hollow eyes, seemed to grin wider than it ever had before. I had no way out, and the store knew it. I ran blindly, my feet slipping on the smooth linoleum as the aisles seemed to stretch endlessly before me. The fluorescent lights flickered above, weak and intermittent, casting shadows that reached and twisted like living things. The dolls were behind me, crawling and slithering across the floor, their cracked faces fixed on me, eyes hollow, unblinking, their tiny, broken limbs scraped against the tiles. Soft, persistent, relentless. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. My voice was gone, trapped somewhere inside me, swallowed by the weight of the store itself. I stumbled into an aisle that wasn't there before. The shelves leaned inward, forming a narrow corridor that seemed to close around me. Every step I took echoed loudly, bouncing back from walls that shouldn't have existed. The photographs lining the shelves stared at me, more grotesque than before. Faces I didn't recognize, twisted in silent screams, mouths open but making no sound, eyes gouged into black holes. And some of the faces, I could swear I had seen them in my own life. Neighbors, co-workers, people I had passed on the street, all warped and trapped in those frames, watching me. The air grew colder, thicker, almost wet, and the whispers returned, louder now, closer, circling me from all directions. I pressed myself against a shelf, trying to slow my racing heart, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real, that this was a nightmare I could wake from. But the store wasn't a nightmare, it was alive, waiting, feeding off my fear. I could feel it pressing in, a weight that pushed down on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I spotted a door at the end of the aisle and ran toward it, hope sparking briefly in my chest. I shoved it open, expecting sunlight, freedom, the familiar outside world. Bright light hit my face, and I gasped, thinking I was finally free. But when I turned around to look back, my stomach dropped. The Dollar Tree sign was gone. The building had vanished. In its place was a blank wall, concrete, gray, unbroken, no windows, no doors, nothing. Panic gripped me, and I ran down the street, my chest burning, my legs aching. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me, soft and persistent, brushing against my ears, growing louder with every step. I checked behind me. There was no one, no dolls, no figure, no store, only empty streets. But the feeling remained, the weight of unseen eyes, the pressure of the store pressing on my back, on my mind, on my very being. I made it home and locked every door and window. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had escaped whatever horror had claimed that store. I stayed up all night, watching shadows in the corners of my rooms, listening for sounds that weren't there. And then, in the early hours of the morning, I heard it, the softest scraping along the linoleum of my own apartment. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't move. The sound grew closer, deliberate, slow, deliberate. I reached for the flashlight I had hidden under my bed, my hands trembling, and flicked it on. The beam swept across the floor, and there it was. My cart from Dollar Tree, sitting in the middle of the hallway, empty, or so I thought. I stepped closer, my stomach twisting, and then I saw it. The doll, the cracked, hollow-eyed doll. Its face tilted slightly, smiling, a mocking, cruel grin that made my blood run cold. I hadn't brought it home, I hadn't touched it, and yet there it was, waiting, watching. Its eyes seemed to follow me as I stepped back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I wanted to throw it out, smash it, get rid of it, but something stopped me. Something whispered that it wasn't just the doll. The store was still with me. Every photograph I had seen, every shadow, every hollow guy's eye carried it all inside me. The whispers, the crawling dolls, the watching eyes, they were mine now, part of me, waiting for the right moment to return. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, flashlight in hand, staring at the hallway, listening to the soft, wet scraping. Every creak of the floor, every faint sigh of air, made my skin crawl. I realized, in a way that chilled me to the bone, that I would never be safe. The store hadn't ended. It had only begun. And then, in the faint glow of the hallway light, I saw a movement in the corner of my vision. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light, but a figure. Thin, tall, unmoving, head tilted unnaturally, watching me. I tried to look away, to convince myself it wasn't real, but it didn't disappear, and the whispers grew louder, circling me, promising that one day I would have to go back. I haven't slept properly since. I haven't gone outside alone, and every time I blink, I think I see the aisles stretching around me, the shelves leaning in, the hollow faces waiting. The doll sits in my hallway, smiling, waiting, and I know, somehow, that one day, I'll be back inside that store, whether I want to or not. The Dollar Tree horror isn't over, it never ends.